You've been told your entire life, work hard, stay patient, be loyal, wait your turn. And eventually, someone will recognize your value. But what if that moment never comes? What if the world isn't overlooking you? What if it's simply waiting for someone else to step forward? Look around carefully. The people leading conversations, the people making decisions, the people influencing others. Were they all invited, or did they simply stop waiting? This is one of the hardest truths about power. Power is rarely given to the person who deserves it most. It is claimed by the person willing to carry it. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. In The Prince, he observed that rulers who waited for favorable circumstances often lost everything to those who acted decisively. Not because they were always better, but because history rarely rewards hesitation. It rewards initiative. And if you've spent your life waiting for permission, this episode may explain why you've been waiting for so long. One of the biggest misconceptions about power is that someone else will hand it to you. A promotion, respect, influence, leadership, authority. People imagine these things arrive as rewards for being talented, honest, or hardworking. Sometimes they do. But far more often, they are recognized only after someone has already begun acting like the person capable of carrying them. That is the uncomfortable pattern repeated throughout history, and it is still happening today. Walk into almost any workplace. One person waits until they're officially called the leader before taking responsibility. Another quietly starts solving problems, making decisions, and becoming the person others naturally rely on. Months later, guess who people already see as the leader? Machiavelli understood that authority is not built on titles alone. It is built on perception, initiative, and the confidence to act before certainty exists. The world rarely crowns people first. It notices the people who begin carrying themselves like leaders before the crown ever appears. And that is where power quietly begins changing hands. Most people don't lose power because they're incapable. They lose it because they keep waiting. Waiting to be noticed. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting for someone to finally say, "You're ready now." But here's the question almost nobody asks. Who decided that permission was required in the first place? Some of the biggest opportunities in life are never announced. They appear as empty space. A difficult problem nobody wants to solve. An uncomfortable conversation everyone avoids. A leadership vacuum that everyone notices, but nobody fills. And while most people hesitate, someone else steps forward. Not because they're fearless. Not because they're the smartest person in the room. But because they understand something the others don't. Influence often belongs to the first person willing to accept responsibility. Think about your own life. How many times have you remained silent? Not because you had nothing valuable to say, but because you were waiting for the right moment? How many opportunities disappeared while you convinced yourself you weren't ready? How many times did someone less qualified receive the opportunity you wanted, simply because they acted while you analyzed? That realization hurts. Because it forces us to confront a difficult possibility. Talent without initiative often becomes invisible. Machiavelli observed this pattern repeatedly. He understood that fortune favors those prepared to move when opportunity appears. Not because fortune is fair, but because hesitation creates openings for someone else. History rarely remembers the people who almost acted. It remembers the people who did. That doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means refusing to let fear disguise itself as patience. There is a difference. Patience waits while preparing. Fear waits while hoping. And from the outside, those two behaviors can look exactly the same. Which is why so many people spend years believing they're being patient, when they're actually surrendering influence one decision at a time. The world cannot respond to leadership that never reveals itself. And power cannot settle where initiative never appears. There is a pattern hidden in almost every workplace, every family, every friendship, every organization. Power quietly moves toward the person who solves problems, not the person who complains about them. Think about the people you naturally trust. The person who stays calm when everyone else panics. The one who steps forward when everyone else steps back. The one who makes decisions when others become paralyzed by uncertainty. Without realizing it, you've already given them influence. Not because they demanded it, but because they carried responsibility that others avoided. This is where most people misunderstand power completely. They think power begins with control over other people. It doesn't. Power begins the moment you become someone others can depend on.
Machiavelli understood this better than most. In The Prince, he observed that authority becomes fragile when it depends only on titles.
Real authority survives because people believe you can handle uncertainty. That belief is earned long before any official recognition arrives.
Look at what happens in a crisis. The room doesn't wait for the organizational chart.
People instinctively look for the calmest person, the most decisive person, the person who appears to know what to do next.
Why?
Because uncertainty creates anxiety, and human beings naturally gravitate toward those who reduce it.
This is why responsibility attracts influence. Not because responsibility is glamorous,
but because it creates trust. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable.
When problems appear, do you become part of the solution? Or do you quietly hope someone else will handle it? Because every time you avoid responsibility,
you are also avoiding influence.
Every time you refuse to make a difficult decision,
you silently hand that decision to someone else.
And with it, you hand them a little more power.
Power doesn't disappear. It moves.
It flows toward the people willing to carry weight that others put down.
This is why, in almost every group, an unofficial leader eventually emerges.
Sometimes they have no title, no formal authority,
no promotion. Yet everyone still turns to them. Everyone waits for their opinion. Everyone follows their direction.
Why?
Because they earn something more valuable than permission. They earn confidence.
Not self-confidence.
The confidence of others.
And once people begin trusting your judgment,
influence starts expanding almost automatically.
Machiavelli recognized this long before the modern workplace existed. He understood that leadership is rarely created by announcements.
It is created by repeated demonstrations of competence under pressure. That is why the strongest leaders often look inevitable in hindsight.
People assume they were simply chosen,
but they weren't.
They spent years quietly becoming indispensable, while everyone else waited to be noticed.
And here is the truth that many people resist because it demands something from them. If you keep waiting for responsibility before acting like a leader, someone who already acts like one will almost always arrive first.
It flows toward the people willing to carry what everyone else is trying to avoid.
The question isn't whether opportunities exist. The question is whether you've become the kind of person they naturally move toward.
One of the most dangerous prisons in life
has no walls, no locks, no guards. It is the belief that someone else must first approve your potential. That belief keeps millions of people trapped.
Waiting, watching, hoping,
believing that one day, someone important will finally notice them and say, "Now you're ready."
But ask yourself something uncomfortable.
How many opportunities have passed while you were waiting for permission that was never coming?
Think back to school. Many people were taught the same lesson. Raise your hand. Wait to be called. Speak only when given the chance.
Follow instructions. For a classroom, those rules create order.
But many people unknowingly carry that mindset into adulthood.
They wait for permission to lead,
permission to speak, permission to negotiate, permission to set boundaries,
permission to pursue the life they actually want. And while they're waiting, someone else is already moving.
Machiavelli understood that power rarely announces itself with an invitation. In The Prince, he repeatedly showed that moments of uncertainty create openings. Not because the world suddenly becomes fair,
but because uncertainty exposes empty space. An empty space never stays empty for long. Someone always steps into it.
The question is, will it be you, or someone else? Look at almost every influential person you've ever met.
Chances are, they weren't handed confidence.
They built it by acting before they felt completely ready. They weren't guaranteed success. They accepted the possibility of failure.
And they moved anyway. That is what separates influence from intention.
Most people have good intentions.
They dream. They plan. They prepare endlessly.
But preparation without action slowly becomes another form of fear.
It feels productive. It sounds responsible. But beneath the surface, it often hides one question.
What if I'm not enough?
That question has buried more potential than failure ever has.
Because failure teaches.
Waiting rarely does.
Every month spent waiting for perfect confidence,
someone else is gaining experience.
Every year spent waiting for certainty,
someone else is building reputation.
Every opportunity postponed because the timing doesn't feel right,
strengthens the position of someone willing to act despite uncertainty. That's why power is so rarely distributed evenly. Not because talent is unequal, but because initiative is. Machiavelli saw this pattern centuries ago. He understood that fortune favors those who recognize the moment before everyone else does. Not because they can predict the future, but because they refuse to let uncertainty make their decisions for them. Now imagine your life 5 years from today. Imagine becoming exactly as capable as you've always wanted to be. But realizing, you spent those 5 years waiting for someone else's approval instead of building your own authority. That realization would be unbearable. Because you would understand something too late. No one was standing in your way. You were standing at the gate, waiting for someone to open a door that was never locked. And while you waited, others simply turned the handle. Power rarely belongs to the people who ask if they're allowed. It belongs to the people who accept the responsibility of stepping forward before anyone asks them to. Have you ever noticed something strange? When uncertainty enters a room, everyone starts looking for the same person. Not necessarily the smartest, not always the most experienced, but the person who appears to know what to do next. That is one of the oldest psychological patterns in human history. When people feel uncertain, they instinctively search for certainty, and whoever provides it quietly begins collecting influence. This is why power is so often misunderstood. People think influence is created by speaking the loudest, by dominating conversations, by forcing authority. But real influence usually begins much earlier. It begins the moment people feel safer following your direction than trusting their own hesitation. Machiavelli understood this with remarkable clarity. In The Prince, he observed that rulers who hesitated at decisive moments invited instability. Not because hesitation is immoral, but because uncertainty creates a vacuum. And human nature hates vacuums. Someone will always fill them. Think about a meeting where no one wants to make the final decision. Ideas bounce around the room. People overanalyze. They look at each other. Minutes pass. Nothing moves. Then one person calmly says, "Here's what we're going to do." Suddenly, the room has direction. Did that person suddenly become more intelligent? No. They became the reference point. Because decisive action gives people something uncertainty never can. Clarity. That doesn't mean every decision is correct. It means every decision creates movement. And movement reveals information. Hesitation rarely does. This is why some people remain trapped for years. They mistake endless thinking for wisdom. They believe that one more book, one more course, one more month of preparation will finally eliminate uncertainty. But uncertainty is not a barrier. It is the environment where leadership is born. The people who shape history are rarely the people with perfect certainty. They are the people willing to act while certainty is still impossible. Look at the leaders, entrepreneurs, commanders, and reformers who changed the course of history. None of them had complete information. None of them were guaranteed success. Yet they understood something that most people never do. Action creates confidence. Waiting consumes it. Every decision you avoid trains your mind to doubt itself a little more. Every decision you face strengthens your ability to trust your own judgment. Confidence isn't built by thinking about courage. It's built by practicing it. Machiavelli knew that fortune often favors the decisive because decisive people are simply present when opportunities appear. While others are still calculating every possible outcome, they have already learned something through action. Now consider your own life. How many conversations did you postpone? How many ideas did you never share? How many opportunities slipped away because you were waiting for absolute certainty? Each one carried a hidden cost. Not just the opportunity itself, but the habit it reinforced. A habit of hesitation. And habits become identity. Over time, people begin to see you exactly as you repeatedly present yourself. If you hesitate constantly, people start expecting hesitation. If you avoid difficult decisions, people stop looking to you when decisions matter. Not because they're unfair, but because you've taught them where your limits are. Power is not built in the moments when everything is clear. It is built in the moments when everyone else freezes, and you move with calm conviction. That is why the decisive so often become the influential. Not because they control every outcome, but because they refuse to let fear become the author of their actions. Taking power is only half the story. Keeping it is something entirely different. This is where many people fail. They finally earn respect. They finally gain influence. They finally become the person everyone notices. And then, they lose it. Not because someone stronger appeared, but because they stopped behaving like the person who earned it in the first place. This is another truth Machiavelli understood with brutal clarity. In The Prince, he warned that power gained through one moment can be lost through 1,000 careless ones. Because power is not a possession. It is a perception that must be reinforced. Every day. Think about how quickly people lose confidence in a leader. One promise broken. One emotional outburst. One act of cowardice under pressure. One moment where they abandon the standards they once represented. Suddenly, people begin questioning everything. Not because the leader became completely incapable, but because consistency was broken. And consistency is what makes people feel safe. Human beings don't follow perfection, they follow predictability. They want to know, can I rely on this person tomorrow the same way I relied on them today? That question quietly determines who keeps influence. Most people think power is maintained through control, through fear, through dominance. But those things are fragile. Fear creates obedience. It rarely creates loyalty, and obedience disappears the moment people stop being afraid. Real power lasts because people trust your stability. They know what you stand for. They know how you'll respond under pressure. They know your principles don't disappear when circumstances become uncomfortable. That kind of consistency becomes magnetic. Because in a chaotic world, stability feels like strength. This is why we've returned to the same lesson throughout this series. Power isn't built on isolated moments. It's built on repeated patterns. Your reputation isn't created by your best day. It's created by what people repeatedly experience when they're around you. Every conversation, every decision, every promise kept, every boundary enforced calmly, every moment you choose discipline over emotion. Those moments accumulate. And eventually, people stop questioning whether you're dependable. They assume you are. That assumption becomes authority. Machiavelli understood that rulers weren't judged only by victories. They were judged by whether people believed they could continue leading tomorrow. Because confidence in leadership is always forward-looking. It's built on expectation. People don't ask, what did this person do once? They ask, can I trust this person again? That's why so many people never hold on to influence. They chase recognition, but neglect discipline. They chase status, but ignore consistency. They chase titles, but forget that titles cannot protect a reputation that slowly erodes. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The world doesn't reward the moment you claim responsibility. It rewards your ability to keep carrying it when it becomes heavy. Anyone can step forward once. Few people continue stepping forward when the pressure increases. That is where influence separates itself from performance. That is where leadership separates itself from ambition. And that is where power reveals its final test. Power is not proven when people first follow you. It is proven when they continue following you because your character has made your leadership believable. By now, you may have noticed something. This episode was never really about power. It was about responsibility. Because responsibility is where power quietly begins. Most people spend their lives asking the wrong question. When will someone give me a chance? But that question assumes something dangerous. It assumes your future is waiting on someone else's decision. Machiavelli refused to see the world that way. In The Prince, he described a world shaped by uncertainty, ambition, and human nature. A world where those who acted decisively often changed history, while those who waited were forced to live inside someone else's decisions. That pattern hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed its clothes. Today, people wait for promotions, wait for recognition, wait for permission to speak, wait until they feel confident, wait until the timing is perfect, wait until everyone approves. And while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Someone else starts the business, someone else speaks first, someone else leads the meeting, someone else negotiates the opportunity, someone else becomes the person everyone depends on. Not because they were born extraordinary, but because they stopped asking whether they were allowed to begin. Think carefully about your own life. How many dreams are still dreams? Not because they're impossible, but because you've placed them behind an invisible gate called, one day. One day I'll apply. One day I'll speak up. One day I'll lead. One day I'll start. But one day is one of the safest places fear has ever found to hide. Because it sounds responsible. It sounds patient. It even sounds wise. Yet years can disappear inside those two words.
Machiavelli understood that fortune rarely waits for people who hesitate forever.
Opportunity is impatient. It moves.
And when it finds someone willing to act,
it rarely turns back.
This doesn't mean forcing control. It doesn't mean dominating people. It doesn't mean chasing power for its own sake.
Because the strongest form of power has never been domination. It has always been self-leadership.
The ability to move despite uncertainty. The discipline to remain steady when pressure rises. The courage to accept responsibility before recognition arrives.
That is the kind of power no title can create, and no title can take away.
Because once you become that person,
influence follows naturally.
People begin trusting you, listening to you, depending on you. Not because you demanded their respect,
but because your actions quietly earned it over time. And perhaps that's the greatest misunderstanding of all.
People think powerful individuals wake up one morning with influence.
They don't.
They build it, decision by decision, conversation by conversation, boundary by boundary, responsibility by responsibility.
Until one day, the world starts seeing what they have been becoming all along. Power is rarely handed to those who wait. It gathers around those who consistently choose responsibility over hesitation.
If there's one lesson Machiavelli wanted rulers to understand,
it was this. History is not shaped only by the strongest. It is shaped by those willing to act when others remain frozen. That lesson extends far beyond kings and kingdoms.
It applies to careers, relationships, leadership, reputation,
and the quiet choices you make every single day.
Because every day, life asks the same question. Will you wait for certainty?
Or will you become the kind of person who creates it? The answer to that question quietly determines who people follow,
who people trust, who people remember,
and who remains invisible despite having incredible potential.
So stop waiting for the perfect invitation. Stop waiting for universal approval. Stop waiting for the confidence that only action can produce.
Because the opportunity you've been expecting someone else to hand you may already be standing in front of you, waiting for a decision. Power is not a gift reserved for the chosen. It is the natural consequence of repeatedly accepting responsibility when others refuse to. And the moment you understand that, you stop asking for permission to lead. You simply become the kind of person people choose to follow.